with him. And I think we can talk to them and really say to them, you know what? This ought to be a bipartisan effort, as Congressman Lewis said last night on Rachel Maddow's show at MSNBC. I think what people have to do is they have to know that by giving up, we lose. By fighting, we can win.
Absolutely.
The Supreme Court, Justice Roberts said, in his words, he said, yes, we know racism and discrimination continues to exist. This is a new nation. This is a new South. I tend to agree to some extent. Yes, it's new, but there's still old vestiges that pop up every now and then. You and Henry and David have been fighting that battle in Macon, the consolidation, and all they're trying to do to change a voting date and, nonpartisan elections. I know the battle you're all waging. Well, we're waging battles up here in Fulton County. Republicans have tried to discriminate in terms of removing African Americans from the Board of Commissioners by merging districts on the north end and on the south end. And so we're under attack. We see the impediments. We see the voter ID laws continue to pop up all across the country. So what we've got to do is say to members of Congress, you need to demonstrate now a willingness to create this new formula and present to the U.S. Supreme Court new data as it relates to where we are right now. Because we can show that right now we still have resistance to voting rights. We still have impediments being codified as a matter of law.
Right.
We still have those who are in power who would like to take our right to vote away. And so we can say that to members of Congress, and we can urge them to go ahead and begin to work towards trying the data, creating a new methodology so that the data would reflect where we are right now. That's what the 5 justices on the court mandated in their ruling. When they rule, that's it. We've got to respond to that mandate. The other thing I would say, keep on doing the voter registration, the voter education, and get ready to turn out your vote in Macon and Bibb, as we've got to do up here in the Atlanta area. You've got to turn out your vote. We cannot sit down and become so sad and become so disenchanted and disconnected that we give up. Now is the time to roll up your sleeves and really, really begin to fight, as Dr. Lowry said yesterday. Dr. Joseph Lowry, the dean of the movement, he called me and said, Tyrone, we got to tell people we've got to continue to fight. We cannot give up.
Right.
So just contact your members of Congress, your senators, your representatives, and say to them, let's meet the challenge of the Supreme Court ruling that came down. The Supreme Court says you've got to demonstrate a new formula. We want to see that from Congress. And if Congress doesn't do it, that means Section 4 and 5 cannot be implemented going forward. Right. We just can't have the protections that we've been afforded in 1965.
Right. Tyrone, thank you so very much. Representative Brooks, thank you so very much. Now tell us, before you leave us, when the next Gabio, Georgia Association of Black Elected Officials meeting will be held and where?
Well, the official meeting of Gabio will be October 25th through the 27th down at the Dorchester Academy in Midway, Georgia. Dorchester was a civil rights training facility. I was a child, as Representative Al Williams and many others. We were trained at Dorchester by Dr. King, Dr. Abernathy, Jose Williams, Andrew Young, Dorothy Cotton. So we want to go down to this training facility and begin to train our communities from around the state and the region and show them how we can do a better job of doing the voter registration and education, how we can get back in the trenches and motivate our people. That's why we want to go to Dorchester. That's how some of us children got involved in the movement, and we were trained, and we were nurtured, and we were inspired when we saw these great leaders come in and teach us. So we want to go to Dorchester, which is right outside of Savannah. It's about 30 minutes from Savannah in Liberty County. I dedicated the museum 10 years ago. Representative Williams and all the leaders called me and said, come down and dedicate the museum because you came through Dorchester. So we want to go to Dorchester, and that will be the last weekend in October now. On July 27th, many of us will be over in Monroe, Georgia again, fighting this battle to close out the Moores Ford Bridge lynching case. Ed DuBose and I were talking last night. He is fired up about this case. He's got Benjamin Tarr-Jealous now, the national presidency of the NAACP, involved in this movement. And we're just going to continue to work to make sure that these old Klansmen who murdered the Malcolms and Dorsey's on July 25th do not get away with this heinous crime. We want them punished. We want them prosecuted. So on July 27th, we will be in Monroe conducting the 9th annual reenactment of the lynchings at the Moores Ford Bridge.
Okay, we hear you. your little one.
Yeah,
there.
He's my little partner.
Yeah.
5 years old, running around with me out here. We're in a park now in Southwest Atlanta.
Okay.
And we just had, just like you had your little ones in Savannah, I got mine today.
Right. Well, we thank you so very much, and we're behind you. We support you 100%. They lied on Jesus. They lied on Dr. King. They killed Dr. King.
Amen.
So the rest of us are just suffering a little bit of what these other folks had to deal with. And so we're going to hang in there. We will remain unbought and unbossed. And
Amen. You sound like Shirley Chisholm.
Yeah, Shirley Chisholm is one of my heroes. She was just a hero of mine, and I never will forget that she stood. I remember her coming through this area, speaking down at a church in Fort Valley, Georgia. It's been, I know, 20 years ago, and I went down to hear her, and she repeated over and over, she was unbought and unbossed, and people like that are the ones that you can trust. Those are the people that we need to continue to look to for information and for guidance through this civil rights struggle. And you certainly are one that we need to pay respect to and support, and we thank you so much for gracing Ask Elaine today.
Well, thank you, Elaine. I'll never forget your support and the love that you and your husband have for me, Reverend Henry Fickman, Reverend Denard, all of those great leaders in Mid-Georgia. Thank you all for everything you've done and everything you're doing now and everything you'll do in the future. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, that was Representative Tyrone Brooks. He's the president of the Georgia Association of Black Elected Officials, giving us a report on the summer conference in Savannah this past weekend. There were sessions on a lot of different topics on economic development. There were topics discussed that dealt with voting rights in anticipation of the Supreme Court decision, which did not come down in favor of the people. President Obama says that he, in a news release, that he's disappointed in the Voting Rights Act ruling. He says he's deeply disappointed with that decision, halting the use of a key provision in the Voting Rights Act. President Obama said in a statement Tuesday that voting discrimination in the United States still exists. He says the High Court's ruling is a setback, but that efforts to end voter discrimination will continue. President Obama says the decision overturns well-established practices that for decades have helped in making voting fair in places where historically there has been discrimination. He's calling on Congress to pass laws to ensure every American has equal voting access. The justices of the Supreme Court said in a 5-4 ruling Tuesday that the provision can't be enforced until Congress comes up with a new way of determining which states and localities require close federal monitoring of elections. And so Representative Brooks is expressing, along with Dr. Joseph Lowry and Congressman John Lewis, their dismay and disappointment at the decision of the Supreme Court. But it's obvious that that stands until something is done. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution urged Congress to reinforce the Voting Rights Act after the Supreme Court ruling. In an editorial opinion, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution strongly urges Congress to move forward quickly to develop a formula to require pre-clearance for those jurisdictions that stubbornly adhere to practices that thwart full access to the ballot, like here in Bibb County with our Republican-led delegation. In the meantime, Atlanta Journal-Constitution urges the Department of Justice to make full, vigorous, and innovative use of other authorities it possesses to thwart racial discrimination in voting. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution joined in an amicus brief filed by the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights in support of the Voting Rights Act. And so there are friends of justice in this country. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court bowed to the five conservatives on there, said that, your voting rights don't need to be protected. You've been protected long enough, so now it's time for you to get up and do something for yourself. Meanwhile, our own dear Republican Alan Peake says that Bibb can now proceed with nonpartisan elections, and Senator David Lucas and Representative James Beverly have said, now wait 1 minute. Not so fast, Alan. There are a few things that you need to consider, and so we are expecting calls in from Senator Lucas as well as Representative James Beverly to talk about what they are proposing, what their thoughts are on this decision and how it impacts us locally. Good afternoon. Ask Elaine.
Hey, Elaine, it's James Beverly. How
yes, Representative Beverly, thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you for having me on your show.
You either heard me or you just were calling at the right time.
Look, I'm right in the middle of seeing patients, so, hopefully I can get on what I've been knowing about it all.
Okay, well, we won't take much of your time, but we do appreciate you taking time to call in. Tell us from your perspective what you think the course of this means for Macon-Bibb County, our elections process, and then tell us what your suggestions are.
Yeah, for our election process, we were right in the middle of filing a complaint to the Department of Justice because they materially changed what the voters agreed to last year through consolidation. And those two material changes were moving the date from November to July and going from partisan to nonpartisan elections. And what we argued was that's a material violation of the Voting Rights Act according to Section 5, which says you can't practice discriminatory practices that adversely affect black people in the community. Well, when they struck down Section 4 yesterday, said you got to come up with a new formula in order to make sure that voting rights continue. What I'm saying and what I felt was, listen, okay, so now 5 is gone, so the argument that we made may not hold up. But the reality is that voting rights is still in play. And so one of the things that we have to look at is Section 2, which is you can't do anything, again, materially to adversely affect people who are minorities in this country, and that's not subject to renewal. That's the law of the land. So when we're saying to, our Republican colleagues, whether it be Cecil Staton or Representative Peake, before y'all push this election down, number one is that formula may include stuff that y'all are doing right now that says that you can't do it.
Absolutely.
The formula hasn't been created. We're already being looked at by the Department of Justice because they're still looking at making it Bibb County. So before you start pushing this stuff down folks' throats, you may want to pause and see what the decision may have been by them so that if we're going to move together in consolidation and the whole region is going to grow, that you at least get the feedback from the folk you need to get it from without some folk in North Macon telling us what we're going to do in the rest of the county.
Right. Now tell us this now goes back. I understand that it's with the county commission now to make a decision and the Board of Elections to make a decision as far as our elections. Where does that stand?
Yeah, so the reality is so we don't have an election in July, and there could be an argument that's made that when the governor signed the bill, he signed a bill this year which suggested that, or signed it into law, that we were going to have an election this summer in July, and it was going to be nonpartisan. When the Department of Justice said not so fast, we canceled that election in July, and so by default, we got to come up with a new date. That date probably has to be in November because most of us turn out at a higher voting rate in November than we do in July.
Well, I got the impression that Representative Peake, Mr. Bertha Peake, was pushing for something earlier than that.
Yeah, and I think if he does that, then what will happen is I will immediately, and I'm so sure that other folks are going to do this, but I know for a fact that we'll file an injunction in federal court. This is not so fast, using Article 2 as a backdrop for that discussion.
Well, I certainly will join you in filing that particular, and I know a number of other people who are prepared now to join you in doing just that. And I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. And that's where we need to be. And again, it's one of those things in politics. I've been in it for less than 2 years, but it does not change the fact that in 2 years I've learned some hard lessons. You know what they are. Some real hard lessons.
You really did make some mistakes, didn't you?
Yeah, I sure have. But blame it on my head, not my heart, right? But what I have learned is that, you know what, when you say something, you better be an honest broker with the people who you're with. And I thought that everybody came with that type of integrity. And
They don't, Representative Beverly. You were not operating with people who were being honest with you. The Republicans in the delegation were not honest, and then you had some who were Democrats who were not being honest.